A bus filled with a group of NYSC members who had just completed a year of service in a village was involved in a terrible accident on their way back to their respective homes, all due to a single mistake. A group of members from New York City lived and worked at the local high school. They were lively, always laughing and making friends with the villagers, but as they stayed longer, their curiosity grew. One sunny afternoon, while strolling along the dusty paths of the village, they stumbled upon the king's palace. The sight of the tall gates and the carved statues filled them with awe, but something caught their attention: a golden crown displayed inside the palace. It shone like the sun itself. Nonso, the most greedy of them all, whispered, "It's real gold. Imagine how much this could sell for in the city." Kaimi shook her head. "I've heard stories about this village. They say the king's crown is protected by charms and spirits. No one who steals it survives." But Nonso laughed, dismissing the warnings. "Those are just stories to scare people. This crown is our ticket to wealth." Days passed, and the end of their service approached. On their last day in the village, while everyone else was busy preparing to leave, Nonso made his move. In the darkness of the night, he sneaked into the palace with two other corpers who couldn't resist the idea of quick money. The crown was there, shining like a treasure in a dream. "It's even more beautiful up close," one said, his voice trembling. "Hurry up," Nonso whispered, grabbing the crown and putting it in a black nylon bag. "Let's get out of here." When they returned, Kaimi saw the bag in Nonso's hand. "Aren't you scared?" Nonso smiled, filled with pride. "I won't give it back." "You're making a mistake," Kaimi warned him, her eyes wide with fear. "You don't understand. This village is not like others. You don't know what you've done." Nonso shrugged. The only mistake was not taking it sooner. The next morning, the group boarded a rented bus, ready to leave the village. The sky was bright, and the villagers waved goodbye with smiles. Kaimi and some others prayed for protection at the start of the journey, but Nonso and his friends ignored them, laughing and mocking. Nonso sat in the back, clutching the bag firmly under his seat, imagining the riches waiting for him in the city. As the bus rattled along the bumpy road, the golden glow of the crown remained hidden, a silent witness to the greed that had set their fate in motion. The morning sun shone brightly, casting long shadows of the bus on the dry red earth. Laughter and chatter filled the air as the corpers joked about their time in the village. Nonso, calm in the back, felt a strange energy emanating from the crown, though only the more perceptive could sense it. Suddenly, the bus jolted and came to a stop with a loud sigh as the engine died. "What's happening?" one of the policemen asked, peering through the window. "The bus has broken down," murmured the driver as he got out to check it, sweat dripping from his forehead as he rummaged around. Hours passed under the hot sun while the driver tinkered, grumbling and cursing under his breath. Finally, the bus roared back to life, bringing relief to the corpers as the journey continued. But soon after, a loud pop shattered their joy. "The tire has burst," the driver announced, his face twisted in frustration. He quickly walked to replace it, murmuring prayers under his breath. The corpers fanned themselves with their hands as the heat bore down on them. Still, nobody noticed Nono's bag or the hidden crown inside, casting an invisible light. With the tire fixed, the bus was back on the road. However, as the miles passed, an uncomfortable silence fell over the group. The warm breeze that once felt comforting now carried a chill. Nono looked around nervously but remained silent. Then, out of nowhere, the brakes failed. The driver's panicked screams filled the air as he struggled to control the bus, now speeding uncontrollably. "Hold on tight," he shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the cries of the passengers. The bus veered violently before plunging into a deep ditch. The crash was deafening, dust and debris filled the air, mingling with screams of pain. As the chaos settled, 3 bodies lay lifeless, their dreams and laughter snuffed out like candles in the wind. Others moaned, their battered and broken bodies calling for help. Rescue teams arrived swiftly, pulling the injured from the wreckage, but as they counted the survivors, one person was missing. "Maybe he was thrown from the bus," one corper suggested, his voice trembling. "Or burned in the fire," another whispered, shuddering. But Nonso was not dead. He had escaped the wreckage, clutching the crown tightly against his chest. His legs carried him away from the debris, his heart pounding with fear and guilt. The golden crown still hidden in his bag felt heavier than ever, as if it knew the blood that had been shed because of it. As Nonso fled, the shadow of his greed followed, waiting to strike again. Nonso hurried away from the wreckage, his legs moving like the wind as he fled the disaster. After hours of walking, he finally found another bus heading to his city. Relief washed over him as he boarded, clutching his bag tightly against his chest. The new bus rolled smoothly down the road at first. Nonso leaned back, thinking about the money he would make selling the golden crown, but soon the bus began to shake. "Driver, what's happening?" shouted a passenger. The driver slammed on the brakes, but the bus didn't stop. It veered off to the side of the road before coming to a sudden halt. Passengers lurched forward, screaming in fear. "It's the brakes," the driver murmured, shaking his head. "They've failed." Passengers grumbled as they exited the bus while the driver inspected it. Nonso remained silent, his heart racing. He knew something was wrong but refused to let go of the crown. After hours of delays, Nonso finally arrived home with his bag feeling heavier than ever. As he entered the house, his younger brother Toba ran to greet him. "Brother Nonso!" Toba shouted, his laughter like music. Nonso forced a smile and patted Toba's head. "Go play." Toba quickly dashed to his room, unaware of the crown hidden within Nonso's bag. But misfortune had already infiltrated the home like a thief in the night. That afternoon, while Toba was bathing, he slipped on the wet floor, hitting his head against a wooden shelf and fell silent. When the family found him, it was too late. Toba was gone. The house was filled with wails of anguish. Nonso sat quietly in a corner, his face pale, his hands trembling. If you've made it this far, I encourage you to like and subscribe to the channel to continue enjoying fascinating content like this. Your support is very important to us. He clutched his knees as guilt gnawed at his heart like a rat. As the night deepened, strange screams began to echo through the house. They were not cries of mourning but something darker and ghostly. Whispers floated in the air, chilling the family to the bone. The wind howled like a wild beast, and the air grew heavy with fear. "What's happening?" whispered Nonso's mother, clutching her robe tightly around her shoulders. Then the next blow struck Nonso's father, strong and proud like an old tree. Suddenly, he fell ill, his body stiffening, unable to move. "Prophet!" Nonso's mother screamed, her voice trembling. The prophet arrived quickly, his face grim as he examined the father. He spoke in a low, firm voice, "Someone has taken what does not belong to them. Until it is returned, this family will know no peace." The family exchanged confused and terrified glances. Nonso sat frozen, his heart pounding like a drum. "Who took it?" the prophet demanded, scanning each family member with his eyes. "I didn't take anything," Nonso lied, his voice barely a whisper. The prophet narrowed his eyes but said nothing more, leaving the family with a warning. If the stolen item is not returned, this is only the beginning. As the family cried and worried for their father, Nonso slipped away to his room. He unwrapped the crown and gazed at its golden surface. "It's just a crown," he murmured to himself with a trembling voice. "Tomorrow, I'll sell it and use the money to fix everything. Everything will be fine." But deep down, Nonso knew the truth. The golden crown was no ordinary treasure, and his greed had unleashed a storm he could no longer control. When the morning sun rose, Nonso's heart was heavy, but his greed remained stronger. He wrapped the golden crown in a black cloth and tucked it into his bag. "Today, I'll sell it," he whispered to himself, his voice shaking as he stepped out of the house, where his family was still in mourning, and headed to the market. The road was long and dusty, but Nonso kept marching, the bag on his back feeling heavier with each step, as if the crown were fighting to stay in the village. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw a shadow. He froze and turned, but there was nothing there. His steps quickened, but the shadows followed. A voice called to him, and he stopped dead in his tracks. It was weak, but familiar. Turning slowly, he saw a figure in the distance. It was Toba, his little brother. But Toba's eyes were hollow, his pale face ghostly. "Return the crown to brother," the phantom figure whispered, its voice carried by the wind. Nonso stumbled back, his heart racing. He turned and ran, but more ghosts appeared, their faces twisted in pain. Some he recognized, others were strangers. When he reached the market, Nonso thought he was safe, but suddenly, out of nowhere, the masquerades burst into view, their tall, colorful figures looming over him, their whips cracking in the air. "Thief!" they shouted. Return what you stole. The first whip struck his back, and he cried out in pain. Another lash followed, and he fell to his knees, pleading, but the masquerades showed no mercy. Please, he cried, I'll return it. But no one else could see the masquerades. To the townsfolk, Nonso writhed on the ground, shouting at invisible enemies. Is he insane? Someone whispered. Nonso's voice rose above the noise of the market. I stole the king's crown, he yelled, tears streaming down his face. I stole it! The crowd gasped. Whispers turned into murmurs, and murmurs into shouts. He stole from the village. The king. Nonso continued to be whipped by the invisible masquerades, staggering toward the prophet's house. His screams filled the air as the masquerades pursued him, their whips cracking like thunder. Nonso burst into the prophet's home, falling to the floor. The room smelled of herbs and smoke, but to others, it seemed like a sanctuary. Help me, he cried, clutching his back tightly. The masquerades won't stop whipping me. The prophet looked at him calmly and sternly, his penetrating gaze fixed on Nonso. What have you done, boy? Nonso trembled, his voice barely above a whisper. I took the king's crown. It's here in my bag. The prophet shook his head. His voice was low and grave. Do you know what you have done? That crown is tied to the spirits of the village. You have brought a curse upon yourself and your family. I hope you enjoyed this amazing trip. Subscribe and don't miss our next video. See you next time.